Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Where is it? It's missing. Where is it? Where did it go? Where did it go? Oh, there it is. Found it. Good Shepherd Sunday. Preachers struggle to find metaphors and analogies and ways to convey one of the most beautiful, powerful images in the gospel and in our relationship with Jesus Christ. That we are part of a great, diverse, amazing flock that is creation. And at the head of that flock, who cares for us, loves us, tends us, guides us, will come and find us wherever we may be, even though we might not see him standing there, is the great shepherd, the good shepherd, the shepherd of Jesus Christ that we can never be separated from. Every year when this passage comes along, I think about images of the Good Shepherd. You probably have many in your life. You can imagine a stained glass window with a Good Shepherd figure in it, Jesus. It's so common. Or an icon, or the name of the church, the Good Shepherd. I bet also each one of us here today has a favorite children's book, or a beloved book when we were a child, that we probably saved, that may be hidden in a drawer or in a box or in an attic, was probably a little bit worn out, but was very special to us. I have a lot of those kinds of books, and I'm not going to take us down the C.S. Lewis route today. We're not talking about Narnia this morning, although it would be very easy to do so. Went to see the movie Tolkien on Friday about the story of the author of The Lord of the Rings and how J.R.R. Tolkien's how his life and his being a veteran in the First World War, being on the Somme, how that influenced his series of books from The Hobbit all the way to The Return of the King, which are a magnificent series of books. Not going to get Tolkien on us either today. Want to uplift another beloved author that has been very dear to me in my life, which probably you never have heard of, and a few of you have, I don't know. His name is Arthur Ransom. And Arthur Ransom wrote a series of children's books that are set in the Lake District in England between the First World War and the Second World War. Now, Wordsworth said that when God created the world, God first created the Lake District, and then whatever was left over, he kind of threw together and it made the rest of the planet. If you ever have the treat to go to the Lake District, you'll know why. It's the land of Beatrix Potter. It's one of the most idyllic, beautiful places, I think, on the planet. And Arthur Ransom wrote these books of these children's adventures on the lake. And they're fascinating because he takes the life of a child and he has them pretend to be grown-ups, or at least be in a grown-up environment, and explore what that means. So it's hard to describe, so give me a second to try to unpack this for you. So it's a bunch of children, and one family of children, Their father is in the Royal Navy and is often away. Another group of children their father has died. Another group of children, their father is a famous archaeologist. And so you could imagine the diversity of these children. And every summer they come to Lake Windermere, which is a combination of Lake Windermere and Coniston Waters, which we won't go into that. But they come together and they have these adventures. And some of them are real adventures. And they pretend to be grown-ups. They learn to be grown-ups in these books. They have little boats. The Swallow and the Amazon and the Scarab are their little dinghy boats. And they sail around the lake and they have all kinds of things happen to them. And they're very hierarchical in a way. If you have ever had a scout in your life, British scouting is all over these books because they've been so famous. I wore out my first copy. I wore out a second copy. And then years ago I was in England and I went to Blackwell's and I thought, oh, they're never going to have this. This probably is a very obscure book because I'm so strange anyway that I read these books again and again and again. And I went to the clerk and she goes, sir, she said, these are British classics. They're there in hardcover, they're there in paperback. Do you want them to be shipped to you in America or do you want us to pack them for your luggage? There are amazing tales of adventure that get into who we are as people. Children struggling with what it means to live in a very complicated world. They learn how to sail their ships. They learn how to build campfires. They learn how to land on islands. They learn how to sail in the dark. They learn their signal flags. They learn all of these little things. And they get around the campfire and then they dream big adventures. And some of these stories are huge, amazing adventures. And you realize at the end of the story, at the end of the book, you realize, well, that was a story, wasn't it? But the real story was what it means to be a human being growing up. What it means to be part of a world in which we inherit responsibility and blessing in equal measure, and where we try to bring those things together. And I'd like to kind of draw this to its fulfillment by sharing a passage with you from one of the books. And it's appropriate because in today's gospel, Jesus goes to the temple in winter. And one of these books is called Winter Holiday. And it's when the children come to the lake, and the lake's frozen over, and they can't use their boats. So what do? They learn how to build ice boats and sail ice boats. And they camp outside in the winter. And how do you do that? Well, scouts know how to do it, and these young people did too. And in one of the scenes, a young man whose father was the archaeologist. So you can imagine he's probably pretty in his head. He's not the adventurous, disciplined kind of guy whose father was in the Royal Navy, for instance. I'll just set that up for you a little bit. But he discovers a strange sound when he's out in the winter in the crags. You know what a crag is? It's a hilly part, it's a hilly structure, mountainous kind of place, and there are these narrow, icy paths that sheep like to wander along. And sometimes sheep become what they call crag fast. Because sheep don't have a backup gear. You ever seen a dog wearing one of those cones? When my dog had to have surgery, I had to wear one of those funny cones, and she couldn't back up with the cone on. She would only go forward. Well, sheep don't have reverse. They only can go forward. So they can wander on a path, on an icy path, and they can get further and further off track. And by the time the path is so narrow they can't turn around, they've become crag fast. lie down and they die. That's what a sheep does. Well, our adventurer, Dick, knows the sound of a sheep in distress, and he hears it. And he goes out and he gets on this very narrow ledge, and he scoots along trying to be very, very brave to rescue that sheep. And it is an absolutely spellbinding description of it, which I can't read the whole chapter to you because you would then not like me at all for doing it. But he's going along and he says, the sheep bleated again, as if it had strength, but it didn't. It tried to fling itself down the valley, but it couldn't even lift its head. It was something so small, under just a piece of sheepskin. It shivered a little. It couldn't move an inch. There was a dull red stain on its left shoulder, and they would paint different colors on sheep in England in that period to show what farm the sheep came from. And Dick and his sister were staying at the Dixon's farm, and Mr. Dixon had red, dull red paint on all his sheep. So Dick knew this was one of Mr. Dixon's sheep. And he calls out, I finally got there. I'm touching it. And then he looks down and sees how far away it is, that if he slipped, it certainly would kill him. So he gave himself a little lecture on where the center of gravity is on the human body, and focus on his center of gravity, which I suppose is something we all do from time to time. He worked out his hand, and he took a rope, and he wondered, oh my gosh, what kind of knot do I tie? Oh dear. But he tied his knot, he lowered the sheep down to the other children, and the buzzards were flying about, and suddenly he was startled by a shout, "We're here! Here comes the dogs!" And the sledge came forward, the rescue party pulled by the dogs, and the sheep was lowered down into safety, and Dick sat on the ledge, feeling like a hero, but as he lowered the sheep down, wishing that he'd only been able to tie a better Royal Navy kind of knot, because John, whose father was in the Royal Navy, is the one who's going to have to be untying it. And that was his concern. It's full of these wonderful, wonderful little images, these books, again and again. My friends, we are called to embrace a shepherd who finds us and leads us and protects us and watches over us in the most difficult situations. But we're also called to be the hands and heart and voice of that shepherd in our world for those people who find themselves in those situations happening to them. That we've been there. We know, and we can be a good shepherd as well. And we can, on behalf of Christ, we can help those who are crag fast in our world, those who are stuck. And like Dick, we can realize that, it doesn't have to be the correct knot on the end of the rope. It's just the fact we showed up, we hung on, and we helped somebody get where they need to go and where they need to be. Amen.
We're here! I'm so glad they can come up here and do all the things I take for granted. I don't want them frightened of the world.
There's our lake.
We could count.
Sleep under the stars. Please say yes.
I promise I'll look after everybody.
You could build G&G.
Wait for me!
Ears to swallow and doll who's sailing her.
I